What's going on, guys? Let's get it. This is going to be a big one. Super excited. Quincy's going to be hopping on here soon. The markets are back in the green today, so we are starting to recover again. Super excited about that. It's going to be a good one, James. It's going to be a big one. Super excited. How's everyone doing today? You guys ready to get this one? Make sure you guys are tapping the screen. Send out some shares. I just dropped a TikTok, so hopefully people will be filing in here shortly. But super excited for this conversation. This is going to be amazing. It's going to be a big one. Get the opening music going. Yeah, I should fire up a little X gonna give it to you. This is going to be awesome. This live stream is going to be an interview with Quincy Jones from Coin Club Crypto. He'll be hopping on here shortly. We're going to get an update on the SEC lawsuit. We're going to talk XDC, XinFin, which is the company that he works for. We're going to talk some of these other cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies, NFTs, other use cases, and where the actual utility is going to be at. This is going to be a good one. No, Matthew, no. There's a very small portion of the world that's actually invested into XRP. Very small. How's everyone doing? If you guys could please share this stream and let everyone know that we are live. About to have an incredible show here with Quincy Jones. Yeah. It's like, I don't even know if 1% of the whole world even knows about XRP, right? So it's still so much opportunity. There he is. What's up, Quincy? Yeah, guys, this is going to be a really fun conversation. Quincy is a developer. He's built on a lot of these projects, but currently working at XinFin and the XDC digital asset. So this is going to be a great conversation. If you guys have any questions, hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A, and maybe we'll answer some questions throughout as well. It's going to be incredible. Thank you, guys. XRP talk mainly. Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about what matters with Quincy, right? So, yeah, we're gonna get to all the topics. Current SEC lawsuit, how much of these markets could XRP actually realistically capture? It's going to be an important conversation coming at this time when we're on the brink of what looks to be a settlement with the SEC. Whether it happens September, October, November, I mean, this thing, like we've been saying, it could be pushed till December, January even. But we're coming live here in an opportunity that's slowly slipping away. So super excited. This is going to be a very important conversation. He don't do price predictions. Yeah, I mean, the thing is we're going to be talking about how these projects could actually facilitate these markets. What's going on, man?
How you doing?
I'm doing good. How's the sound coming through for you?
It's coming in all right.
Good. So super excited to have this conversation, man. I really appreciate you coming through. I know the community is really looking forward to it. You definitely have captured the attention of. Uh-oh, we already lost him. There he is.
There we go. Sorry about that. I was putting on what's it called? Do not disturb.
Oh, I should do that as well. You've definitely captured the attention of the XRP community, man, and I'm super excited to have this conversation. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to update us on your current status, where you're working at. I know
Oh
you
yeah.
just joined XinFin, so what's the current update? How have you been, man?
Yeah, so I left. It's funny. So I left like my longtime job of like 3 years for sort of like a newer, like higher paying job, and then I like quit that like on the spot for like XinFin basically when I blew up on the spot. And yeah, so now I'm working full time at XinFin, basically developing on their platform, putting out new projects on top of my projects that I may have. And yeah, my biggest thing is being able to develop the XinFin ecosystem, the XDC ecosystem, and sort of, I guess you could say, sort of parse out different partnerships we may have with different companies operating in the United States.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Was part of the appeal or like the attraction to you just technology, or had you'd already blown up here on social media, right? You've amassed over 30,000 YouTube subscribers and really have taken off in the last couple of months. Are they like excited about your social media work, or is that part of the
Yeah,
attraction?
yeah. Part of it is so XDC is one of the tokens that I was planning on using like for kind of business needs, and they liked the way I explained it. And they didn't really have too much of a community outreach in terms of being able to get people in the community to understand what their token does and what their blockchain is capable of. Where like different currencies like XRP have a lot more of a base of people that understand their technology but also share it. And XinFin didn't have that, so they kind of already liked that I was able to explain a lot of their technology, but at the same time, be able to broadcast in such a manner to be able to really get out to people like, hey, this is what the technology is able to do. Here's what you can do with it. Here's the technology that it can be interoperable with, and so forth.
So it seems like it doesn't really bug them that you're talking about all these cryptos, because it seems like XDC really is established and has, they know what their market is and what they're going after. Is that what seems to be the?
Yeah. So it's funny that people think that like I mean some cryptos are competing, but XinFin's really trying to make its own space and XDC is trying to be its own space in which it's able to fulfill a series of automation tasks, both on public blockchains, but both in private, while at the same time being able to be interoperable with multiple blockchains to be able to, actually engage in enterprise needs cross blockchain. And one example of that is with Ethereum, but also you're trying to see that with XDC and Flare and FSX. But the biggest thing is being able to foster an ecosystem in which applications can essentially execute. Mostly, I mean, obviously they're focusing on building out the XinFin ecosystem, but also be able to be interoperable with technologies that aren't inherently native to the XinFin ecosystem.
Right. And is trade finance kind of the big market that they're targeting? I know, I think that you've alluded to they are kind of working with central bank digital currencies as well. What's the main focus for them right now?
So there's kind of like two ways to really look at it. So there's what XinFin's doing, and then there's what people are doing with XinFin and like the XDC like protocol, because these are open source protocols. So anybody, tomorrow can go, I'm going to use this protocol for this. So XinFin's trying to, expand into not only trade finance, but sort of just like enterprise, I guess you could just digital enterprise, and they're trying to essentially be the basically the private blockchain of the, or not really private blockchain, but the enterprise blockchain of the future with private capabilities. And they essentially want to do that. They want to essentially do what Ethereum does in the public space for private businesses, but on an enterprise level. And they get compared a lot to different technologies, but their biggest thing is making sure that they're trying to fulfill a series of needs, like specifically, whether it be in trade finance or automation or just sort of how they foster their ecosystem.
Yeah.
And unless other sort of projects are trying to focus on those same needs, it's not really so much of a competition as a more of a it's more of a they are just operating as two technologies in this space. They don't not all these technologies do the same thing, but at the same time, even the ones that do aren't being used for the same reasons. So it's a very hodgepodge of like people are trying to build technology in this direction, and then people are building on it just how this may be. You see what I mean?
Right. Is it similar to like with XRP, they're and Ripple, they're building a private layer for central banks. And so I definitely see the need for, central banks or businesses to have that private layer built on top of the open space. And so that seems to be a main part of XDC's capability.
Yeah, the biggest thing is compliance, and that's kind of the big thing that like, and I saw this in my professional career, but the biggest thing is compliance when it comes to enterprises. So they can't really do anything if it's not really within the bounds of the compliance needs they already have that they're already struggling to complete. So with a lot of these other public blockchains, it's hard to meet any sort of compliance needs because there's no real like privacy, and that's sort of like the fundamentals of a lot of what these compliances are. So XinFin tries to like mitigate a lot of that, where you can still get the full access to a lot of these public blockchains, while at the same time being able to manage those compliance and private needs of whatever that enterprise may be.
Right.
And it's important to have because no matter where you are, if you're an established institution operating in a regulated environment, you have some form of compliance to abide by, which is going to be rooted in some form of privacy. So that's one of the big things XDC is trying to go for when it comes to capturing that market.
Yeah, great. Well, and since you mentioned compliance, that kind of ties into our first topic, the SEC lawsuit with Ripple. Um, just quick take. Do you think that this case will be settled up?
What do you mean? Like in general, yeah, I think what's going to end up happening is it's going to end up setting a precedent for how certain digital assets are going to have to operate. Now, not all of them, because not all of them are going to do the same thing or all of them are going to be operating in the same way. But I think it's going to set sort of a basic template to move forward in regards to how to regulate a lot of these technologies. It's one of those things, too, where regardless of whatever happens, I think the enforcement is going to be strict. And then the real question is, who's it going to be strict on? Is it going to be strict on Ripple? Is it going to be strict on the sale of XRP? Is it going to be strict on the sale of all crypto? Is it going to be strict? It's going to be strict somewhere. But the biggest question is, where's the line on what's considered what? And just because it's strict doesn't mean it's not going to be used. It just means there are going to be barriers in place, whether it's getting specific licenses or certifications or whatever it may be in regards to operate as an organization in that regulated environment. There'll just be more obstacles in play.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think what I'm wondering is you already had basically a lawsuit and a settlement with the CFTC and FinCEN back in 2015 for Ripple, where they called XRP a digital asset. So to me, it looks like we have kind of a power struggle between maybe not even a power struggle, but just where like who's going to regulate these assets. And I think from what we saw with XRP and Ripple and the origins of that, Ripple never did an ICO. And the way that XRP was kind of created and then gifted to Ripple, the question is, at some point, was it a security? Maybe. I think at this point, I think that it's going to be pretty clear that it's not a security because they never did an ICO. So what's your take on that? My opinion is that all of the ICOs are going to be regulated by the SEC, and some of these other assets are going to be regulated more like a commodity. Is that kind of along your line of thinking?
Yeah, I think what's going to end up happening is I think a lot of these networks are going to be looked at. I mean, assuming that they are sufficiently decentralized, I think that most of these assets would be looked at as some form of commodity because essentially they'll have some sort of property or some sort of good that has value and then some sort of scarcity that limits that value that creates a price. And what ends up happening is under no under no control of one entity in this broader ecosystem of participants is that commodity's value entirely derived by. It's only derived by what people are able to make use of it. So sort of the same way of like some potatoes may not be worth anything to you, but the commodic value comes down to what people can do with potatoes. You see what I mean? Where a company is just a work of people to where they create some sort of output. You see? So I think that's where the networks are going to end up going. I think the real blurred line comes into these networks were created by people, and a lot of these people that created these networks become incredibly wealthy. So that line becomes a real question of, are these securities now because these networks were created by these people? They operate in a certain way. They're trying to go for a certain level of decentralization, but there's sort of two questions in that. One, when they first created it, was it a security then, and is it a security now? And two, did they violate any laws in regards of creating their wealth originally in the setting in which that wasn't legal? You see what I mean? So it becomes a really big question of, and this may happen to Ripple, where they may be perfectly fine now, but they may get slapped really hard for something they did a long time ago, even if it's not a big deal now, because of the framework that was sort of set up. Yeah. And it's one of those things where something has to be done because things are already in motion. So it's one of those where, yeah, things may be different and they may be classified a certain way in the future, but I do think there'll be sort of like this retroactive enforcement, not only on Ripple, but probably on basically every creator in the space to some degree.
Right. So you're saying that they're going to go back and say, hey, this wasn't done properly, and maybe here's a slap on the wrist fine. We're not going to try to wipe you out, but you need to pay up a little bit, right?
Yeah. So, and I think some will be fine and others will get wiped out depending on where they stand. Like, it all depends on how big you are and how you're able to navigate this. And then obviously, like, can you handle, setting up a legal, all that. And obviously these operations or these entities are trying to operate decentrally. So it's only really applying to people that reside or companies that reside in the US. It seems like foreign countries or foreign, I guess you could say foreign entities that would be creating projects like this would kind of just be operating in more of a, are the people that are using their networks going to be regulated to not use their networks, or will they just be penalized for using their networks and then continue operating? You see what I mean? So it's one of those things where like for example, XinFin doesn't reside in the United States, they're in Singapore. But let's say, I mean, right now XDC is not on Coinbase, but let's say it was. And if it was, would that mean that, Coinbase would get in trouble for holding XDC and then getting, paying a fine for that? And then it's just like, that's just what they can enforce? Or will it just be like a simple, like, oh yeah, we're going to try to, ban these regulated whatever. And then that becomes another question too, because in order for someone to it's actually hilarious because in a project I'm working on privately and I'm trying to organize a bunch of I guess you could say a bunch of different entities to collaborate together to create this project. And we came across, I call it the Satoshi problem with smart contracts. So if you want to create a decentralized autonomous organization and you want to have regulated entities operate in the same space as these decentralized entities, well, at some point, someone needs to be held responsible, and by responsible, it almost seems like someone needs to do the paperwork. Because that's what I see. It seems like someone needs to be there to do the paperwork. But at the end of the day, for every organization in operation, there needs to be someone behind it. But with these decentralized networks, it's essentially governed by everybody on the network at the same time. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it becomes a real question of who do you point the finger at? It becomes a weird question of like, I could go after this company operating on this network, but how do I go after participants on the network if anybody is trying? It's almost like the same sort of ballpark of, remember back in like the 90s, they were like suing people for like downloading, what's it called? Video or songs off Napster, and they were getting like charged like per song. And they can go after like very specific people, but they can't go after everybody because everybody can sort of do that,
Yeah.
So it kind of just changed the space. I think the same sort of thing is going to happen with crypto, to where it's like you can enforce, regulation against these entities that operate on these networks, but these networks are there regardless. Like you could, if they wanted to, they could sue Ripple out of existence, and that wouldn't change the fact that the XRP ledger exists,
Right. And Ripple actually has like a huge legal team and actually can afford to fight a case like this. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to, is to get any project off the ground, you need a massive compliance and legal team and budget for that. Like, which is kind of unfortunate. But I mean, we do have to. I mean, well, there's been a lot of scams, right? And so, what's that fine line? I feel like it's very tough, especially when you got the CFTC, the SEC, and a half dozen other three-letter agencies that you have to report to. It's tough. I mean, it's difficult, right? Just to be in compliance, even if you have a legit project and you really have like utility to bring. But I wanted to ask, we've had basically a direct quote from Jay Clayton and Gary Gensler saying that nearly every ICO that they've seen is a securities offering. And then on the other hand, we had Brad Garlinghouse state that he thinks 99% of cryptos are going away, which, you got to put those two takes together. And guys like Brad, they don't just say things like that. So is that kind of what you're alluding to? And that a lot of the space is kind of just going to close up shop once the SEC turns on some of these bigger projects?
Yeah, I think there's two things with that when it comes to a lot of cryptos going away. One, there's the regulatory concern, and yeah, I do think most ICOs are going to be looked at as unregistered securities in some regard. Yeah. Mostly because of how they were done. Mostly it was because they were mostly done the same way that startups raise money, where they would go out, they'd find investors, they'd raise the capital, create the product, and then the investors. And I think that wasn't really the whole point of crypto, but that's just how it looks. So it's just like it. Oh gosh, the little
got the goggles.
But it just looks bad, and that's the thing. You're looking at a government entity, so they're not going to be creative about this. They're going to go, this is exactly how this is, and if it looks like this and it's framed like this, and there's no other way for us to define it, then we're just going to charge you with that. And I think that's what's going to happen. But I don't think that's going to be the thing that kills crypto in a sense. I think a lot of cryptos are going to have to move to be compliant. I think the things that that thing that's going to kill crypto is, let's say there was an event, whether it was regulatory, or let's say there was just like a market crash and whatever. I think the cryptos that have the majority of the liquidity in their ecosystem entirely based off of retail like volume are going to go away, because as soon as retail's gone, then the tokens are gone. But if the tokens are based off of some sort of underlying enterprise like volume, in which the way I like to look at it this way is, if it's being used in order to run something as opposed to being used for somebody to just buy and sell, like and it's really hard to like sort of look at it if you're not, like, I guess you could say, like in the space. But the best way to look at it is the underlying volume needs to be supported by essentially enterprises rather than individuals in order to have a sustainable liquid market that's able to sustain an actual economy. And when you have the entire economy solely based off of the willingness for people to buy and sell solely based off of that, and that's how you get crazy speculative bubbles. And that's what's going to happen, to where if people just stop buying and people just stop selling, then it's going to crash to zero. Where if there's some sort of underlying volume, no matter where the price ends up going, somebody has to buy it for their enterprise, for that underlying volume need, whatever that may be. Yeah. And let's say it was for payments, then let's say you needed a minimum amount of this many tokens to run your payment operations, because you need this much liquidity and value to run your enterprise. No matter what happens to the price, you're still going to need that minimum amount. You see what I mean? Right. So that's what, if the base volume of that network is based off of, like I said, enterprise volume rather than just retail volume, I think you're going to actually see like a good sustainability in regards to the use case and the longevity of that technology. But yeah, it's one of those things too, where a lot of these, like, you can already see them in regards to a lot of the retail tokens, or people want to pump them up based off of retail sort of like speculation. And those are the last ones you want to get into, because that's where the entire liquidity is solely based on the emotions of the people trading it, rather than, the actual use case of whatever it is. Yeah. And it seems silly because it's kind of like right there in your face, but it's one of those things where, like I said, if the token is entirely based off of retail volume, I don't think it's going to make it, basically.
Yeah. Okay. And I know that this would just be speculation, but do you think, in my opinion, the SEC, to save face, might go back and give like Ethereum a slap on the wrist fine, or do a little something with them? But a lot of people in the XRP community are complaining because Ethereum seemed to get a free pass. But do you think that they're going to go back on Ethereum because obviously that was the biggest ICO in cryptocurrency history.
Yeah, I think they're gonna go back on everybody. That's the thing. Like
Okay.
literally, I think that's why I called the thing I was talking about earlier the Satoshi problem. So what we're trying to do now is if you created a DApp, a decentralized, or just a decentralized app, but some of the DApps we're trying to build are going to be DAOs, and basically trying to assign the responsibility could basically turn into this legal liability thing, and it comes down to like if there's no one to blame, there's no one to sue, and there's no one to sue. There's like it's almost like a checkmate move on legal enforcement of like you have nothing to enforce if you have no one to charge. You know what I mean? So and it seems like the only answer to get around this, because no matter what you could have done, they could have literally done like almost a full on like done the paperwork and done the registration and had it sold as a security, and I bet they still would have had them come back and say, well, you have illegal sales of this security in Japan based off of because it's a decentralized network, so anybody can sell to anybody, and it could turn in like I think no matter what anyone would have done, they still would have come back for this because there's no framework to put this in order for you not to get. That the whole point of not getting sued is having a framework to operate in, so you're operating legally. There's no framework to even operate the conceptual technology you're trying to utilize, then they're just going to go with whatever it looks like, and if it looks bad, then they're just going to treat it that way regardless if they understand what it actually is. And it's one of those things too where I think it's going to take one or two, like I don't think the Ripple lawsuit's going to be the biggest lawsuit. There may be like another bigger lawsuit to really start like getting it into play that like it's really hard to operate in this space without actually having some serious clarity on what can happen. Because I'm telling you, like, no matter what anybody does, and I'm already anticipating this too, and it seems like no matter what you do, it seems like you're going to step on some sort of red line because, like, there's no framework to really gauge how these technologies really operate in the modern age, or at least in the old modern age where things were sort of tracked by really just people writing things down. Now things are so automated and it's a global protocol. It's like you can automate everything that's happening now, but it's one of those things where they don't even understand that it's like on this global. It's a very weird thing to explain, and because of that, it's like, hey, look, one sale. Like I said, if you took like Ethereum, them coming after Ethereum. If you took one Ethereum and sold it to somebody in Brazil, and then sold that same Ethereum to somebody in Japan, it's like, okay, well, if it's a security, then all of you just sold the security, like all out of, they'd be completely out of balance of their ability to sell it, and then it'd become of who are you going to enforce this against because they made a sale, but it's an online protocol, so it's no different than somebody sending an email over the internet. But it's just that you lose value, and because it's classified a certain way, it means that we have to enforce it a certain way, even if it doesn't operate. Like there's no security in the world that can automatically just be sold, in 3 different countries in like 20 minutes. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So basically, in conclusion, you're saying XRP is going to set the standard for regulations.
Yeah, I think XRP is going to be, and just what's happening with Ripple, because I think part of the reason when they went after Ripple too is because Ripple's a structured entity and like an actual corporation, where Ethereum has the Ethereum Foundation and then a bunch of other like sort of like foundations under it, and then there are companies that operate on Ethereum, but they mostly just accept it. So it's like there wasn't really like a straight shooter to come at in regards to in regards to coming after crypto, other than Ripple, because like XRP is like a top 10 coin, so it's like it's really up there, very popular. The people that are associated with Ripple are also very popular, very well known, and that's the thing. I bet like it's one of those things where I bet even Ripple knew this was gonna happen. They're just kind of like, yeah, when it happens, it happens. Because it seems like, at least from my perspective, it seems like there was no way out of this. Like some lawsuit was going to happen in some regard for something in some capacity, even if it was just to make a statement on about like, hold on there for a second. And,
Right.
It seems like there's really no way to navigate unless unless you're like working for the SEC and you're going, this is what we're going to do. And then, but unless that's the case, it seems like there's no real way to like navigate the space without actually suffering some form of consequence, just because the framework's not going to allow. And I think it's simple things that are simple on blockchain that totally violate the entirety of how they structure some of these regulatory frameworks. So it's not even like you can like dance around it. It's like almost like an on or off thing with some of these.
Yeah, well, I think that that's a good point. What you said basically about they were kind of expecting it, because for my take, they are way too comfortable to make it seem like they're at all worried about like what's going to come from this case. It just seems like they really have a strong case, and then after this discovery phase, a few months of this, the case has kind of really been blown wide open, and we've seen kind of the hypocrisy from the SEC, and then just Ripple. They've set up an office in DC, and then if you look, the clips are coming out now of some of these guys saying that Ripple is leading the way in the communications with regulators and trying to, approach them with open arms. And so I think that you're right about something that about that take, that basically Ripple was kind of expecting this. And when I listen to Brad talk or David, it seems like they're very comfortable with having to go through this, and they understand that this is part of the process for Ripple.
Yeah. I'm just from everything I'm seeing, it definitely just seems inevitable, especially if you're one of the first ones. It's one of those things too, where like now that Ripple's getting sued, there's probably a bunch of other companies that were operating in the same way that are like kind of tiptoeing now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things to be anticipated, to where it's like I don't see any way around this outside of potentially, like it seems like even if they did everything right, just due to the nature of the technology, you would have violated something, because these are global protocols. So it's really hard to like really wrap like who can sell and who can it almost like some of these global protocols completely defy like how these regulations are, because the whole idea of regulation is being able to contain an environment. But these global, like I said, these global protocols, they're global. Like it's almost like any other internet protocol. So it's really hard to contain. And it's part of it comes down to recording sales, and part of it comes down to regulating who can sell what. Last thing, it's like, how do you do that when anybody with a smartphone can interact with anybody else in the world with internet access?
Right. Yeah, and so I want to ask now about XinFin and XDC. Not financial advice, but it is my number two holding right now out of all my cryptos. And I will say, not that you're the sole reason, but you are a part of that, because I had an idea about XDC and all that before you came on the scene here, but then you've really explained, the private public layer to that blockchain and how that's going to be so important. So I just, could you give a quick summary for anyone who doesn't understand the difference between like a XRP and an XDC and how it distinguishes itself?
Yeah. So XDC is actually a hybrid blockchain that allows for a public-private ledger access. So what you can do is you can have public data that's just like any other blockchain and interact with the broader XDC blockchain. But you can also have containment over your private data with a hybrid ledger, by being able to contain certain private data about your organization on this broader blockchain. So what ends up happening is you end up getting sort of the best of both worlds, and being able to have that public access and that public utility, and being able to interact with the overall broader ecosystem,
Yeah.
while at the same time being able to retain your own data privately for whatever your enterprise use case may be. And most of that, like I said, comes down to compliance, privacy, security, but a lot of different things that businesses need in order to operate, because they can't be entirely public on the network, but they're able to get that same access. On top of XDC trying to create different bridges to different networks, like creating a bridge to Ethereum, and creating just different bridges to be able to be interoperable with other smart contract networks.
Yeah. Perfect. Hey, I'm sorry, Quincy. I want to go back real quick. Just one last question in regards to this situation. You've alluded to this in a couple other interviews, I think, but are you seeing a possibility where we're not going to be able to buy XRP after a settlement takes place, that it will not be available for public retail?
Yeah. So it's kind of crazy too, because in finance you see this a lot, but I guess a lot of people like aren't really that familiar with this. So in finance, like for a lot of different for a lot of different assets to be traded, you need usually some sort of commercial license or some sort of certification by an organization or something. And I usually might like to make jokes that like you literally need to have like, what is it, like the Series 7 and like a couple of other different certifications just to be able to like sell like rice derivatives or like milk derivatives or something. And part of that comes into that whole regulatory framework of how these assets are traded. So the same way with, how commodities may be traded or securities or equities or whatever, and you have these different licenses and these different certifications people need. And I actually thought about getting a few of them just because I was thinking more finance early on. But at the same time, now I'm like, a lot of these are just so you can, it's almost like just so you can have the privilege of doing something that you were already competent to do anyway. It's literally just an exam. But it just comes down to, in those regulatory frameworks, there are these different licenses people may need to handle a lot of these different assets. And the only reason crypto hasn't really fallen in there yet is because like it's so new that no one's really set the standard for how that may be. And the main reason this may happen, and I thought about this too, because like, and I guess you could say this is my own little speculation for why this is, but I thought about this too for like commodities. So I was like, oh wow, you could like have an app to trade stocks, but like it's like I've got to do all this stuff to like trade grain or milk, and I always made jokes that like milk is like the ultimate asset to hold, and I'll get more into that in like probably in a video I'll make. But I just thought it was so funny that you need all these licenses. And it seems the main reason for that is, one is a certain level of competency to understand like what's happening in these markets, not to like read the market, but to know how to like really deliver on a lot of these assets, and how there's a whole process for how these different entities sort of operate. But two, it sort of makes sense not to have like just a retail market for everything, because you can get speculative bubbles. And something like different commodity goods and different asset goods, it would make sense to be able to restrict the amount of speculation that could go into any of these individual markets. And it makes sense. The thing. So when you look at these as commodities, it makes sense because you don't want to have, milk go to the moon one day and milk goes from like $3 a gallon to like $20 a gallon because speculators bidded it up. And I know it sounds insane, but it'd be literally something like that, where you'd have these weird little price. And that's the thing, it wouldn't be like perfectly lined up to where like, oh, just today someone bidded up milk and now milk's crazy. It'd be like, something happens this week and like 3 weeks later, people are like, why is milk so expensive? But it makes sense that you would have these different limitations in regards to speculation in these markets. And it makes sense that they would do the same thing for crypto if they're deemed more as commodities in a sense, because they're basically able to allow these uh, networks to operate for the enterprise needs they may need to operate as, get the enterprise volume they need, while limiting the amount of speculation they may have in order to conduct that broader trade, because they need
Right.
that low volatility for that broader ecosystem. So it's easier to conduct trade. It's easier to conduct trade on, a 2 to 5% volatility band rather than, 20%, 500%, 50, whatever. So it's really good to crack down on the volatility to do something like that if it came down to that. Now that's just my own speculation, of course, but I see why that is the case now in the traditional markets, and I don't see why they wouldn't do that in the future sort of crypto markets. Especially, in essence, people are sort of looking at cryptocurrencies, and you're going to see different crypto assets pop up, like different like crypto equities pop up. You're going to see different crypto licenses pop up. You're going to see different crypto, like crypto commodities, cryptocurrencies, different crypto assets. You're going to see a bunch of different types of crypto assets pop up, and they're all going to have their own. It's probably going to be a whole nother organization, kind of like the SEC, they'll probably manage digital assets, because there's going to be a whole asset class of assets to manage that do a ton of different things, and they're all very similar, but at the same time, they all do very different things. So,
And that might allude to some of the theories that we've heard about an agreed upon price, or maybe you could say like an understanding. The XRP or any other token, if it were to run, some of these bigger markets, it would need to be at a much higher price, and part of getting it there would be keeping retail trade and speculation out. So, do you think that that is a potential or a possibility?
I think the biggest thing, and I said this before, and I'll say this now. I wouldn't get too crazy about this because this is just a hypothetical, but you can consider it like the Quincy theory for why you have this effect happen. So yeah, you definitely need a certain amount of liquidity in any sort of ecosystem in order to have a sufficient amount of participants operate in that ecosystem at maximum efficiency. So it's one thing to, like, let's say you had a bank, and let's say the entire ecosystem had $100 billion in it. Okay, that's cool. But if that one bank moves, $50 billion a day, and there's, 200 banks. Well, you need a sufficient amount of liquidity in that ecosystem for them all to be able to move the amount of volume they need. So this kind of goes into the escrow. So one thing that you see is that the escrow gets delivered every month. And one thing that you could very easily do to set liquidity in the market, not only for the escrow, but for the broader liquidity in the market, is if somebody came in and bought the escrow at, and it doesn't matter what price they bought it at. What matters is how much liquidity is there needed. And this doesn't have to be one entity. Although if this was, this would probably just be like the treasury or something. Someone coming in to say, hey, we need. It is saying it doesn't matter how much. It doesn't matter how much XRP they would need or how much of this token they would need. They would say, we have this many billions of dollars or this many trillions of dollars. We need to run it on this network. How much can we fit? And then basically liquidity would be set based off of them spending that much money each month. You see what I mean? Based on the amount of tokens they're able to get each month, it would set a base level of liquidity. And the reason why I say that is one, that once that ends up happening is any sort of additional sort of pressure put on the price would be essentially from anybody else that's going, oh, well, we functionally don't have access to any more other, this token or XRP. And currently the people that are buying it are using it for, volume consumption. So the current sort of speculative trading amount of volume would be going down while the enterprise volume would be going up because people would be using it for enterprise needs. Yeah. So functionally, what you would see from the sort of retail perspective is less and less XRP would be available on the market for regular people because the businesses are going, yeah, the only way you could get access to it is through this entity or these series of entities. And if that's not the case, then you have to go to the markets, which would just bid up the price even further than it otherwise would based from the set liquidity that was bought from the escrow every month. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. I think that there's a lot right there. Like there's going to have to be a base amount of liquidity agreed upon, basically to facilitate these markets. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, so I want to ask about some of these other projects before we talk about XRP for a full hour and don't talk about some of these other ones that I do want to mention because I know that some of them will do something, I guess. But we were talking about XinFin, and I think you've already alluded to this, but I just wanted to ask pretty simply, like, what's the main focus for XinFin as far as the target market? Is it just enterprise use?
So it's enterprise automation and ecosystem development for a broader decentralized network. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to take companies that already operate in a certain way and introduce them to the blockchain in sort of a native manner so they don't have to change too much of what they do while still being able to tap into the broader resources that the blockchain is able to offer, while at the same time also being able to be to have different native connection methods to other blockchains for native features within the smart contract ecosystem. So you could build something on, you could have a traditional company take their traditional structure, start integrating it into the XinFin ecosystem in regards to having, the private data stored in public access. And then they could use that public access to not only interact with XinFin smart contracts, but other smart contracts that may have different bridges to the XinFin network.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So for me, when I'm looking at these different projects, I mean, obviously I'm just investing. I'm not a tech person building on them or anything, but I'm just looking at, a basic understanding of the technology and how the coin works, the tokenomics, I guess you could say. And then I look at, for a lot of these projects, the company behind them and the partnerships that they have. And so I wanted to ask, like, maybe this is public information that I don't know. I haven't really gone too deep on XinFin, but what's their biggest partnership that you can mention? I'm sure there's talking with many entities and big groups, but what's the biggest one that's kind of already public or that you can mention?
I think everyone's looking at everything all wrong when it comes to like partnerships and when it comes to these networks. So people do that because they reference it the same way companies do. But these are open source software. So I like to sort of equate it to like Linux. So like, are you familiar with Linux? Like, it's just an operating system. Well, Linux is an operating system, and adoption wouldn't be that anybody has to, work with the Linux Foundation or anything. It's just somebody just taking the operating system, using it, and building whatever they have on it. It's the same thing with these other open source softwares in regards to crypto. So yeah, like XinFin's got a bunch of partnerships, and that's cool, and that's stuff that you can talk about publicly. But really, anybody that goes, oh, I'm gonna set up my application on XinFin, the same way where at my previous job, where we decided, hey, we're gonna start running some of our operations on Corda. That's Corda adoption, but you're not really gonna see it because people are sort of looking for the it, and that's where they look at partnerships. But like a partnership is cool and it is a little bit of adoption, but for every partnership, there's probably like 1,000 other people that aren't even being recognized at all because they're just running their daily operation on their business. And that's just the technology they chose to use. And one thing I like to sort of point out in regards to one way to look at it is look at kind of how most of the internet's run is run in the cloud. And if you look at AWS and you look at Amazon, anybody can run on AWS, although this isn't like a perfect analogy. Anybody can run on AWS, but it's not like you can just have a partnership with Amazon. And that doesn't mean just because you have a partnership with Amazon that like it's all this great and everything. People running on AWS is still contributing to the Amazon ecosystem. You see what I mean? The same way that people,
right?
What was that?
Ripple's Ripple's already running on AWS, aren't they? Like,
so see, this is where the confusion comes into play. So AWS can accept XRP, or I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying it could, and that's just an adoption of the technology. If they're working with Ripple, that could be a partnership of some sort, but they can adopt the technology outright just because the technology is open source and you can just use it. You see what I mean?
Right.
So anybody, like I could put together a company that can run on 12 different blockchains, raise $1 billion for it, and say, look at the adoption. We're using the technology. No partnerships required, and $1 billion added to that ecosystem. You see what I mean? And that's happening all over the world because you can't see the partnerships in that because they're just going, oh, that's brilliant. We should just use our business for that, and they just do. You see,
right?
So it's a very weird thing to try to find that. But the biggest thing is to just look at like who's using these technologies, and it's not like like the most public thing ever. It's mostly just seeing like, hey, like if they're going to use this technology, they're going to work with this person that uses this technology. Are they doing that in any capacity? And that doesn't have to be the company that created the technology. It's just a network effect. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So if I'm working on XinFin and somebody else is working on XinFin, well, then we could very natively work on XDC together. And that's like, you can actually see this. I forgot where the study was. There's one when it came to Corda, where it came like half the businesses that use Corda are like multi-billion-dollar corporations with like 10,000 employees or more. But it's one of those things where nobody would hear about it or nobody would care because it's the back-end systems processes to probably your insurance company or some random mortgage firm, or you see what I mean? It's not something people would talk about, but that's like billions of dollars going into the Corda ecosystem solely based off the use case of people using the enterprise software. And it goes the same thing with XinFin. It goes the same thing with XRP. But like for every partnership, that could be a good amount of liquidity. But I think people like really overhype the amount of like adoption that's happening with that. Because like I said, I could very easily, I wouldn't say very easily, that sounds ridiculous, but I could hypothetically, or let's say I was a super rich person, just say, I'm going to work on XinFin and then take an app I was already going to build it on XinFin, take a bunch of money into it, dump it in there, and it would never be plastered on the news because it's just a back-end systems process, unless I make it a big thing where I'm like, look at me, I'm running on, you know what I mean? But nobody brags about how they're running on AWS instead of Google Cloud or running on Google Cloud instead of Azure. It's just a back-end systems process. So it's one of those things where it's like, that's where the real adoption is, because it's one of those things where by the time they come out with it, they probably would have already been running on it for months now. And that's the thing. That's where it's like, the real volume's coming into play because they're using it, you see?
Right.
And you don't need a partnership for that. You can literally go directly to the software right now, download the software, set it up, run it, and then boom, that's adoption. And then basically being able to add resources to the network by being able to build your applications on there or being able to transact value in any sort of manner. But that's like the biggest thing I want people to focus on, because this is happening all the time. And I think it's one of those things where it's hard to evaluate because people look at the charts. And it's one of those things where, like I said, if some billionaire decided to use, XDC one day and then, the volume just jumped a crap ton out of nowhere. Well, it didn't just jump out of nowhere because somebody just went to the exchanges and bought a ton. It jumped out of nowhere because they were using an app and it needed to use a ton. So they bought a ton to use it. And now, you see, and I think that's what's going to happen with a lot of these underlying networks that you're not going to see directly, but people will be freaking out anyway, even though it could have just been a business decision made months ago that now came to fruition in regards to being able to automate a certain process in their business task. You see?
Right. So, and I really like that you point that out, because I think that, yeah, that's predominantly what we see in this space is everyone's looking at the tokenomics and the partnerships and am I going to get rich off this or not? But what you're saying is basically a partnership. It could be just two people saying that they're friends. That
Yeah,
doesn't.
literally. Like I can give you a perfect example of a partnership. Freaking like I was gonna do this thing with XinFin, but we thought we were gonna build something for them, and they just wanted their logos like plastered on. You see what I mean? Like, and that's the thing. That's a partnership. Like, that's not gonna add any volume to the network because we started plastering logos all over the place. But yeah, it could literally be something as simple as that. But you could have like little Jimmy create like the next Facebook on Ethereum or XDC, and that's no one will ever hear about it till after the fact. But that volume would have been factored in from day one, from whenever he started.
Right. Right. Okay. So really, a lot of this is happening on the back end, kind of is what you're saying, and we're not hearing the real adoption that's taking place. Like these partnerships are just public facing announcements.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because yeah, a lot of the partnerships aren't even really like partnerships. They're mostly just like announcements, like you say, announcements of things that may or may not have happened either now or a while ago. But it could be something as big as we're building stuff together, or something as shallow as like, oh yeah, we're gonna host an event together and we're gonna plaster logos all over the place saying that way. You see what I mean? And like I said, there are always people out there building stuff, and it's hard to evaluate. It's really hard. Like I don't blame people for being like sort of caught up a little bit, but it's one of those things where I see it a lot too, where I'm like, wow, like I've seen some apps where I'm like, whoa, this is insane. But like they have no marketing team at all, so you would never know the amount of volume, and they're like trading in like the tens of millions in volume,
Yeah.
and nobody would ever know. So it's like, look, this is the adoption people want, but it's not going to be an announcement until way after the fact, where things are way more established. But
Yeah.
sorry about that.
No.
But real adoption starts when people start moving volume in an enterprise manner. Like regular retail is just going to be an engagement between broader ecosystems and broader dApps that you're engaging with.
Yeah. No, I appreciate
Those
that.
dApps are going to connect to other dApps, and those dApps are going to create to a bunch of series of other processes. And those processes, like it'll be, look at it this way, right? Let's say you wanted to engage with a dApp for, like, let's say it was a basic payment dApp, and this dApp did a bunch of other things other than just the payment. But let's say in that payment, you're able to send messages, it's able to send notifications, it does a bunch of different things. And you triggering this one smart contract isn't really triggering one smart contract. You're triggering like 4 different smart contracts for this broader dApp. Well, what you did was you did one transaction of volume that really turned into 4 transactions of volume. Not that that's really going to add more, but what's going to happen is those processes are going to trigger with other autonomous processes. So let's say every time this dApp gets triggered, it triggers another dApp to pay out this. So now that volume is now structurally on the network. And that's the thing. It's not that it's coming in or coming out. It's coming onto the network and it's staying on the network and it's transacting. So you're almost able to, it's almost like you're able to, what's the best way to put it? You're almost able to realize the value based off of you using that value within its own ecosystem rather than you just exchanging one form of value for another to bring it in. You see what I mean? It's like it's bringing value into the ecosystem and it's growing it and sustaining it. You see?
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I was just thinking of one like silly example of myself being guilty of this. I bought Algorand only because I saw like the founder or the CEO of Algorand take a picture with Brad Garlinghouse. Like literally, I saw him like take a picture at the Bitcoin conference. I think it was where the picture was taken with Brad, and I was like, okay, they're in the club, and so I bought Algorand. But like you're saying, like we're just buying off of partnerships and announcements more so than actually looking at where the adoptions and the where the real markets are being built. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, that's going to be one of the biggest takeaways from this conversation. I think is that explanation about partnerships that you just laid out. I appreciate that. So now moving on, I wanted to ask, Stellar and XLM has been a very interesting project in this space. It seems like one example that we were just talking about is these partnerships. There was word spread that the Stellar Foundation was working with the Bank of Ukraine to build their CBDC. Well, I went and looked at that, and it appears that basically the foundation was just consulting them on their CBDC, not necessarily that they were even building on XLM.
That's what I mean by the partnerships and stuff. Like something as simple as, hey, we're gonna have a conversation, turns into this whole. And that's the thing. The Ukraine government may use XLM and do everything that they say, but like they also may consult with like 20 other different entities about the same sort of problem. So
yeah. For me, it seems like Stellar is working on central bank digital currencies as their main focus. Is that your opinion or your kind of take on that?
I think
Just from the outside looking in.
So I guess like Stellar the company or XLM the technology. What do you mean?
Well, I guess Stellar,
I know
because
like Stellar,
XLM's.
I guess it's not a company. I guess it's a foundation. But like
Yeah.
where the foundation wants to go, or what do you think people are using the technology for? Because I can tell you what I think people are using the technology for, but then also there's what Stellar is trying to do in a sense.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking about what Stellar's doing. I'm looking at them kind of as like how they compare to Ripple, and kind of what their main focus is. And what I asked was XinFin, what's the main markets that you guys are approaching? So yeah.
Yeah, in terms of what I think they're doing, I think they're focusing on currencies in general and sort of making like I guess you can call them bankless currencies. So I guess you could say CBDCs, but more of in the sense of how do you create a how should I put it? How do you create a currency in such a method in which people can easily access it? So if it's a CBDC, that's cool. If it's like one of their anchored asset, currencies, backed by whatever, that's cool. But I think they're trying to create a native method for people to engage in just how should I put it? It's almost like they're creating a digital cash in a sense, almost like what the original dream of Bitcoin is. And I think they're trying to do that by creating the modern native mechanism for what a currency is. And essentially all it would be is how we engage with crypto now, but in that fiat stance in which there's some sort of value back to whatever that token that you just sent on that network. You see?
Okay.
And I think the biggest thing with that is because I've seen a bunch of stuff in regards to what they've been doing with currencies. But oh my gosh! My stand fell over. There we go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
But yeah, I remember reading that like one of their original dreams were basically to bank the unbanked, and basically what they wanted to do was create a cash system for people that only had access to the internet. And it seems like that's just like the biggest thing is being able to take just internet users and being able to have them have access to the typical payment rails that they otherwise normally wouldn't.
Yeah.
And also being able to offer mechanisms of being able to instill value in different assets that they list on their network.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then like, how does that compare to these like corporate digital currencies that we're seeing? Like Libra is one project that, has been catching some attention. It's kind of not been in the spotlight lately, but like, how does that compare to something like Libra?
So I'm pretty sure Libra, which I'm pretty sure got rebranded to DM now,
right?
Which actually may have got rebranded to something else now too, actually. But anywho, like Facebook's little currency was basically supposed to be a native mechanism for people to interact with Facebook's marketplace, on top of interact with all the other stuff on Facebook. I think what they're just trying to do is Facebook is just trying to capitalize on the digital currency game and then have their own native ecosystem. That's kind of the big thing when it comes to like a lot of these social media companies. They already have the ecosystem for people to engage. They just don't have the payment rails. So if they had a native payment rail, it kind of just seems like a no-brainer. But at the same time, like it's like if people already like it's kind of the biggest deal with Libra. People already didn't really trust Facebook, so they didn't take Libra seriously as opposed to like any other crypto out there.
Yeah.
Like somebody could have just launched a random coin called like absolute doo-doo coin and people still would have dumped their money in there before they put it in Libra just because of the Facebook connotation.
Yeah. And so kind of like when we talk about central bank digital currencies and you got corporate currencies and all this, are you seeing that like basically these companies are going to create their own ecosystems but then we're only going to have like a handful of blockchains that these will settle on. So basically, like every country will have their own central bank digital currency. Every corporation might have a token, but we're really only looking at like a handful or so of these bigger blockchains that are going to settle the actual value taking place, right?
No, I actually think it's going to be a bit of a hodgepodge. I think you'll see a handful of big ones, but I think you may see a almost a sea of like little networks that do obscure things, weird. And that's the thing. It's not like, and this all presumes that there's some sort of fundamental like volume under them. Like this isn't just people supporting their token, buying it and selling it and hodling it. This is like it could just have some weird, obscure niche feature, but because it has that feature, there's some volume because of that feature. So I think you may have like the giant public ones that everybody knows about and sort of the, considered part of the public internet. And then you'll have sort of a sea of just obscure small ones that do a bunch of different features, sort of the way that we have like there's, if you look at sort of different companies and different softwares, they're always like giant companies and there's software kits that they put out and all the different things they put out. But there's also a slew of a bunch of other companies that do similar things in just obscure manners. And I think the only difference with this is you get that public aspect of it. So instead of having basically if it has a feature that's worth anything, essentially the global participants of that feature will support the value in that network and then essentially grow that network value based off the participants.
Yeah.
So it's like if it doesn't have any of that, and like I said, if it's just based off retail, as soon as retail stops, then the price goes to zero. So if there's somebody out there or just a small group of people out there going, I need to use this feature in this regard, therefore I use this token. See what I mean?
Right.
There'll always be some sort of volume in regards.
Dude, I see that we've already been on for almost an hour and I'm only like halfway through everything that I wanted to cover with you.
Wow, what time is it now?
It's 5 to 2. So I want to,
Oh wow.
yeah, I don't know how much longer you got, but I wanted to try to push
Yeah,
through.
I only got 5.
Okay, cool. Let me see. So quick take on NFTs. I'm worried that a lot of retail traders are going to be getting themselves into trouble. I see this market has a lot of hype, and I think you've alluded to where there's actually going to be utility with NFTs. But what's your quick take on NFTs right now?
Yeah, so like if you really want to instill the idea of an NFT, the idea of an NFT, because everyone tries to allude them to being pictures, but what an NFT is a digital representation of an object on the blockchain. Now, this can be a native representation, like a hash of that digital object, like a file, whether an audio file or music file, or I guess you could say like a video file or whatever. Or it could be a representation of a real life object, and then that NFT, just like you would print out a piece of paper to represent, the title of your home. Well, you would have the same information represented as an NFT to represent the title of that home. You see what I mean? And essentially, all objects that will reside on these decentralized networks that aren't necessarily native. Essentially, you could say native exchange tokens because not all of them are going to be value tokens, but you're going to essentially have more NFT item objects on these decentralized networks than you would anything else because they're just going to be digital representations of things that already exist in some regard, mostly in regards to property rights. So people can essentially have digital allocated rights of whatever the property they may have on these decentralized networks. So it's one of those things where if you own something, a piece of digital rights, whatever it may be, or you may own the rights to something with a digital representation, you essentially can prove on the entirety of this decentralized network that this digital item belongs to you, or this digital representation of this item belongs to you. And that's basically, in a nutshell, the best way you could sort of break down NFTs in a functional manner to understand what's going to happen in the future, because you can have an NFT that could essentially be the key to your hotel, or you can have an NFT that's essentially an ID, or you can have an NFT that's a representation of your title or a representation of your car title or whatever, or you can have an NFT that can almost be anything as long as it's a representation of something. You see, a unique representation.
And you're talking about kind of tokenizing the whole world, and that's probably the best way that I could end this is, what's your like current timeline, do you think, on like how soon all of these markets are going to be tokenized? I mean, I understand this is going to take a while, but like, what's your current like timeline and expectation for how quickly we're going to see like the stock market tokenized and some of these other markets moving to, these blockchain?
Uh, I think you're already seeing it. I think what's going to end up happening is it's going to be one of those things where the economic sustainability of the uh, of the corporate entities already in the space is going to be challenged by essentially new people that are able to do the exact same thing on like a shoestring budget. And what ends up happening is the adoption doesn't come because they want to. It comes because the competition becomes insanely fierce. To where, like, if you were a firm and you were operating, offering 2.5%, exchange fees or something, and now someone's able to operate off a decentralized exchange and they're able to get 0.5% to 0.25% per transaction fee, and they don't need a giant corporate operation to be able to run this application on a decentralized exchange. I think it's going to force a lot of adoption, mostly because not only will people be able to build applications at a lower, I guess you could say, a lower barrier to entry, but also it's just going to make it more efficient for the corporations that are already adopting it, or already either adopting it or in the process of like evaluating whether or not they're going to adopt it. But yeah, it's just one of those things where we're already in the process. So I think the biggest thing will happen is once you get regulatory clarity on how these digital assets are managed, and two, in regards to CBDCs and having digital currencies in regards to native payments from your bank account to different types of automation tools, whether that be smart contracts on blockchains, whether that be being able to make payments from one network to another network, whatever that may be, you're going to have some form of CBDC that's able to sort of bridge that general gap between people using their general bank account for regular needs and being able to use that same account to execute different automations on these decentralized networks.
Okay. And if I could sneak one last one in, if you had to pick one blockchain that you think will move the most amount of value through it, which one do you think that would be?
So I guess this would come down to how you want to look at the global markets, and you can really come down to the answer if you really wanted to break down like global market GDP statistics. But the biggest thing would come down to is there going to be different segments of the global markets that are going to be absorbed by these decentralized networks. And finance is one of them because obviously people like payments and people like different exchanges and all that. But also there's going to be business enterprise, business automation. There's going to be back end logistics. There's so many different things that make up the broader economy rather than just finance. So the real question comes into, well, do you think it's going to be bigger, finance or biggest business enterprise? And based off of who do you think is going to be bigger, what network do you think is going to operate within those two sort of realms of finance or business enterprise based off the potential growth of their sort of respected economies, because they're able to sort of absorb not only the value within these ecosystems that are already residing, but they're able to grow them even further because they're able to be more efficient than they currently are now. You see what I mean?
Right.
So that's the real question. So do you think, and I'm pretty sure like the financial sector makes up like 12% of the economy, and I think the government sector makes up around 20%, which is another question too. If you think your network's going to be used for government contracts, that's like 20% of an economy. I think the business sector is like 40%, maybe like a little less. I think the medical sector is like 20%. It's like something like that. But yeah, it comes down to who do you think is going to encapsulate the most value based off of their sort of sly of the economic pie.
Right.
That rhymed.
Well, I appreciate you being here, Quincy, and answering all these questions. I wish I had you for another 3 hours, but I appreciate the time, man. And I wish you all the best success. Where can people follow you? I know YouTube and Twitter are your biggest followings, I think.
Yeah, you can follow me on YouTube at Coin Club Crypto, and you can follow me on Twitter at Coin Club Quincy, And yeah, I drop content on there pretty much every day, mostly just tech content in regards to developer stuff, and just explain how the technology works.
Awesome. Thank you, man. I appreciate your time, and I wish you the best.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Take care, man.
All right. You too.
All right, guys. That is the end of the conversation with Quincy. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. That was an amazing conversation. really appreciate Quincy coming through, giving us the time. Like I said, I only got through about half of the questions that I wanted to, but he's so good at explaining things for people like me who need the simple explanation. So yeah, I'm going to re-upload this on YouTube. You guys can check it out there. Yeah, that was awesome. That was an awesome conversation.